Hi, hello, how are you going? So it's July, and do you know what that means? Well, one is the best month of the year. Actually, I like spring more than winter, so maybe September or October are the best months. Anyway, that doesn't matter, and that is not why we're here. We're here because it's Jane Austen July. Jane Austen July is a month-long readathon hosted by Katie from Books and Things, Marissa from Blatantly Bookish, and Claudia from Spinster's Library, where we read books by, about, and adjacent to Jane Austen. There are prompts, challenges to do for the readathon, which are 1. Read one of Jane Austen's main 6 novels. 2. Read something by Jane Austen that is not one of her main 6 novels. 3. Read a non-fiction work about Jane Austen or her time. 4. Read a retelling of a Jane Austen book or a work of historical fiction set in Jane Austen's time. 5. Read a book by a contemporary of Jane Austen, published between 1775 and 1817. 6. Watch a direct screen adaptation of a Jane Austen book. And 7. Watch a modern screen adaptation or retelling of a Jane Austen book. There are usually 2 group reads for the readathon, but this year is a little bit different as there is a group read and a group watch. The group read for this year is Emma, and the group watch is the 2020 Emma. Which is cool, as Emma was actually the first Jane Austen I read. I read it in 2021 as I wanted to read it before watching the 2020 Emma. And I reread it in 2023 for Jane Austen July, so 2025 is actually the perfect time to reread it again. And hopefully this doesn't end up like my Jane Austen July of 2024, where it never got to see the light of day. So yeah, anyway, let's get on with Jane Austen July. Hello. At the end of each week, I thought that we could do one of the Jane Words puzzles, which is a Jane Austen quote game. So our one for today is Mr. and Mrs. Blank were all compliance and blank all happiness. So I think it might be from Pride and Prejudice. Oh, no. Northanger Abbey, maybe? Yay. And then I'll do the bonus round, so you pick who you think says the quote, and I think that this is the narrator, so yeah. And the actual quote is Mr. and Mrs. Mullan were all compliance and Catherine all happiness, from chapter 1 of Northanger Abbey. This week I started and finished reading Emma, which was way ahead of the reading schedule. So Emma was published in 1815 and follows Emma Woodhouse, who is handsome, clever and rich, with a comfortable home and happy disposition, and seemed to unite some of the best blessings of existence, and had lived nearly 21 years in the world with very little to distress or vex her. To get an idea of what Emma is about, I'll include a part of Sir Walter Scott's review of Emma from the Quarterly Review. The object of most young ladies is, or at least is usually supposed to be, a desirable connection in marriage. But Emma Woodhouse, either anticipating the taste of a later period of life, or like a good sovereign, preferring the weal of her subjects of Highbury to her own private interest, sets generously about making matches for her friends without thinking of matrimony on her own account. We are informed that she had been eminently successful in the case of Mr. and Mrs. Weston, and when the novel commences she is exerting her influence in favour of Miss Harriet Smith, a boarding boarding school girl without family or fortune, very good-humoured, very pretty, very silly, and what suited Miss Woodhouse's purpose best of all, very much disposed to be married. You don't really get it from either of these, but some people can't stand Emma as she can be snobbish and prejudiced, and in the memoir of Jane Austen from 1870 by her nephew James Edward Austen Lee, he wrote that she was very fond of Emma, but did not reckon her being a general favourite, for when commencing that work she said, "I'm going to take a heroine whom no one but myself will much like." Which I do know two people, my sister and my nan, who aren't fans of her at all. So Jane Austen was kind of right. But even if you don't like Emma herself, read it for the elegantly plotted story and the colourful cast of characters. Emma is a very layered novel and opens up even more on each reread. It's intricately plotted with clues throughout if only you are willing to read. Especially in the long effusions of Miss Bates, which you can kind of lose focus in the droning on. And even in Frank Churchill's dialogue, which can be read in multiple ways. It's also interesting to read from the point of view of someone that is always wrong. Emma's confidence leads her to believe that she's made the match between Mr. Weston and Miss Taylor. Her misjudgment of people, or maybe even her willful ignorance, leads her to be wrong about Harriet and Robert Martin, wrong about Harriet and Mr. Elton, wrong about Harriet and Frank Churchill, wrong about Harriet and Mr. Knightley, wrong about Frank Churchill and herself, wrong about Jane Fairfax and Mr. Dixon, wrong about the mysterious gift of the pianoforte, and wrong about Jane and Frank Churchill, but everyone in Highbury was wrong about that, so I won't hold that against her. "I seem to have been doomed to blindness," Emma says as the realisation hits. I'd like to include this quote that I couldn't find a neat place for, but here it is. "To youth and natural cheerfulness like Emma's, though under temporary gloom at night, the return of day will hardly fail to bring return of spirits. The youth and cheerfulness of morning are in happy analogy and of powerful operation, and if the distress be not poignant enough to keep the eyes unclosed, they will be sure to open to sensations of softened pain and brighter hope." This is for anyone that has experienced nighttime anxiety, as everything seems worse at night and can be alleviated with the arrival of morning. Now, I'd like to quickly look at the similarities between Mr. Elton's reaction to Emma believing him attached to Harriet and Harriet's reaction to Emma believing that she is attached to Frank Churchill. Here we have Mr. Elton's reaction. "Good heaven!" cried Mr. Elton. "What can be the meaning of this? Miss Smith? I never thought of Miss Smith in the whole course of my existence. Never paid her any attentions but as your friend. Never cared whether she were dead or alive but as your friend. If she has fancied otherwise, her own wishes have misled her, and I am very sorry, extremely sorry. But Miss Smith? Indeed. Oh, Miss Woodhouse, who can think of Miss Smith when Miss Woodhouse is near?" And now Harriet's. "I should not have thought it possible," she began, "that you could have misunderstood me. I know we agreed never to name him, but considering how infinitely superior he is to everybody else, I should not have thought it possible that I could be supposed to mean any other person. Mr. Frank Churchill, indeed. I do not know who would ever look at him in the company of the other. I hope I have a better taste than to think of Mr. Frank Churchill, who is like nobody by his side." It's interesting to see how similar the reactions are. Mr. Elton reveals his true character to Emma after she had been warned, but I wouldn't go as far as to say that it reveals Harriet's true character, but it does go to show how Emma has shaped her, influenced her. The only thing I could find fault with in the book is when Mr. Knightley says that he has been in love with Emma ever since she was 13 at least. Which is especially icky as he is like 16 years older than her. So a 29-year-old in love with a 13-year-old, I don't even want to say it. Ew. Ew, ew, ew. Off-putting, really. I still would like to read the introduction to Emma in this edition. I know some people don't like the Penguin Clothbound Classics editions, as the foil print on the cover can wear off, but I really like them as the content inside is really good. Although I'm a bit more careful when I do read them. They are my pride and joy. I receive them for special occasions. It's nice to go back and see the message on the inside, as I also like seeing the messages in my nan's books from when she was given them by her family. Even this book was given to my nan at Christmas in 1952. I never said this before, but I don't really like how books smell. I'm not going to open a book and give it a big old sniff. I mean, it depends on the book. Honestly, sometimes they smell like vomit to me. Anyway, all that to say, I don't really like the smell of books, but this book smells exactly like my Nan and Poppy's lounge room, and I love that smell. Not that it's a perfume smell or anything, but it smells nice to me. Anyway, that means we've done the first prompt, read one of Jane Austen's main 6 novels, and honestly I couldn't think of a better way to spend winter than by reading Jane Austen by the fire. Then I started reading some of Jane Austen's youthful writings. My book calls them youthful writings, but I've heard them called her teenage writings or juvenilia, but some people don't like calling it juvenilia. I'm not exactly sure why. Maybe it's because of the connotation of the word, as it may have been written when she was young, but it certainly isn't juvenile. This is for prompt number 2, read something by Jane Austen that is not one of her main 6 novels. I've already read some of them for Jane Austen July in 2023, so it's nice to revisit some of my old favourites and read some new ones. This week I started with the stories and pieces in volume the first, and from the ones that I read I found that Edgar and Emma A Tale, which was a fave from last time, was still one. Anyway, I liked it as it reminds me of scenes in her novels. The conversation in chapter the first between husband and wife is similar to conversations in Pride and Prejudice between Mr. and Mrs. Bennet, and it also makes fun of sensibility in young girls, as with Marion Dashwood in Sense and Sensibility. Also, I saw that Katie, Marissa and Claudia were going to be doing a live stream, but it was at 3 AM on Sunday for me, so I was like, do I wake up early or do I just stay awake? But I thought better not, and I'll just watch it at a later time. So yeah. Anyway, that's the end of week 1, and I'll see you next week.
Jane Austen, I think she died about, I saw it there recently, around about 1816 or something.
Yeah, 1817.
On Google. It was some list of books that are still getting read, you know, whatever, and it had Pride and Prejudice up there.
Mm.
Somewhere, I must have read a book about, and it would have had, in other words, she got a lot more fame and recognition well after her death than during the time of her life. And it might have even had, so this one writing and doing a biography, and she would have, they had a niece that did marry well, or we'll use those kind of expressions, right? And you know, it was like you put the Austen ones down, that part of the family would be put down as and yet now if they were alive today, that'd be the ones, they wouldn't be talking about, they say that niece and her relatives or connections, whatever. I'm like Eleanor, I'm sure Eleanor would like that, because when you said Emma, she didn't like Emma.
Yeah, she doesn't like Emma.
Because she thought that she was putting farmers down, right?
Oh, yeah.
In other words, she was a snob, and Ellen took it to heart.
Yep.
But aren't they? Yes.
Okay, so we've come to the end of another week, so we're going to play Jane words again. And this is our one for today. His resentment was in proportion to the distress of his circumstances, and he was doubtless as violent in his abuse of me to others as in his reproaches to myself. I'm going to guess this is Mr. Darcy talking about Wickham, maybe? Okay, so I'm going to guess Pride and Prejudice. Yay! And then for the speaker, I'm going to do Mr. Darcy. Yay! Okay, that was good. Thanks. Hello, this is our week 2 wrap up. So this week I continued with the youthful writings and I finished volume the first and started volume the second. My fave pieces from last time that have remained favourites include The Beautiful Cassandra, a novel in 12 chapters, which was dedicated to and named after her sister. It's a funny story about all the extraordinary adventures Cassandra gets up to in a day. A lot of the youthful writings aren't concerned with seriousness or propriety, but more about fun and silliness. Also, The Three Sisters, a novel which is a series of letters about 3 sisters and a horrible wealthy man that wants to marry one of them. The mother is keen for him to marry one of them. He doesn't have a preference, so he offers marriage to the eldest sister, and she doesn't know whether to accept or not. She'd like the prestige of marrying him, but he is not an amiable man, so life with him probably wouldn't be pleasant. But if she declined, he would propose to one of her sisters, and then her sister would have a rich husband, and she doesn't want that. It is quite a funny story as well. Then we have Ode to Pity, which is a poem that plays with the tropes and cliches of poetry from the early 18th century. So yeah. This week we also started The Murder of Mr. Wickham by Claudia Gray. For the 4th prompt, read a retelling of a Jane Austen book or a work of historical fiction set in Jane Austen's time. I was going to read Jane Fairfax by Joan Aiken, which is an Emma retelling from the point of view of Jane Fairfax and was recommended by Katie from Books and Things. But to read it I had to buy it and the reviews kind of put me off. So instead I've chosen The Murder of Mr. Wickham, which I borrowed from the library, which I've been enjoying. It's not exactly a retelling as it doesn't follow any plot of Jane Austen's novels, but it does bring together a lot of Jane Austen characters from different novels. And anyway, it's a work of historical fiction, so I don't know why I'm needing to justify my choice. So it's interesting to see the changes made to the timeline so that all the characters from the various novels fit together quite neatly. So the characters come together and then a character is murdered. Mr. Wickham, it's in the title. I don't think that's a spoiler. Anyway, at the start we follow Emma, who's up to her old tricks again. She did what she did to me to him, the whole time knew it. Well, anyway, she's up to her old tricks again. She's been making lists and avoiding reading. You're both great lovers of poetry, I understand, Emma said. And novels too. I fear I have never been a great reader myself, no matter how many lists of books I make. Which is a reference back to the book Emma. Emma has been meaning to read more ever since she was 12 years old. I have seen a great many lists of her drawing up at various times of books that she meant to read regularly through. And very good lists they were. Very well chosen and very neatly arranged. Sometimes alphabetically and sometimes by some other rule. The list she drew up when only 14, I remember thinking it did her judgment so much credit that I preserved it some time, and I dare say she may have made out a very good list now. Which honestly, ew, still off-putting when we know that he was in love with her since she was 13 and he's 16 years older, so we have a 30-year-old man carrying around lists made by a 14-year-old. Yuck. Alright, back here. 2. She's back to her matchmaking shenanigans. So yeah, that's all I have to say so far about The Murder of Mr. Wickham, so I'll see you again next week. so we've come to a part of the week that has slowly become my favourite, where we play Jane words. The person, be it gentleman or lady, who has not pleasure in a good novel must be intolerably stupid. I'm pretty sure this is from Northanger Abbey. Is it Jane Austen as the narrator? No! It has to be Henry Tilney then. Yay! I am intolerably stupid. This week I finished The Murder of Mr. Wickham, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I think that Claudia Gray got the essence of most of the characters, and it was fun to see the characters of different novels interact. I especially enjoyed the pairing of Anne and Fanny, our two quieter heroines. And I like the invented characters of Miss Juliet Tilney and Jonathan Darcy. And if you know Jane Austen, you can work out whose children they are. Anyway, Miss Tilney and Mr. Jonathan Darcy assume the role of amateur detectives to find out who murdered Mr. Wickham. It was nice to follow their friendship throughout, and I was satisfied with the conclusion. I'm looking forward to reading the next one in the series, so you can cross off prompt number 4, reading a retelling of a Jane Austen book or a work of historical fiction set in Jane Austen's time. This week we also finished all of Jane Austen's youthful writings, as we read volume the 2nd and volume the 3rd. And we actually read a couple pieces that are new favourites, which were Letter the 3rd, from a collection of letters called From a Young Lady in Distressed Circumstances to Her Friend, which is a letter from a young lady to her friend about her encounters with Lady Greville, a horrid woman who Maria must endure in order to go out in society. And also one of her scraps, a letter from a young lady whose feelings being too strong for her judgment led her into the commission of errors which her heart disapproved. Yes, that's the title. Which is a letter from Anna Parker, a murderer and perjurer, to her friend Eleanor, which tells of her singular courtship with Colonel Martin as she helps him to inherit £8 million, and because of her help asks for her hand in marriage. It is delightfully dark, and I'll leave a link to an animated video of this story if you'd like to watch it. Reading Jane Austen's youthful writings provides an insight into how she wrote and what she would improve on and carry through to her 6 novels. They are hilarious, silly, and were written purely for entertainment, enjoyment of her family and friends. Anyway, that means we can cross off prompt number 2. I mean, we could have crossed it off after I read that first piece. However, that doesn't matter. So we can cross off read something by Jane Austen that is not one of her main 6 novels. This week I also started reading What Matters in Jane Austen by John Mullan for the 3rd prompt, read a non-fiction work about Jane Austen or her time. I never really read non-fiction for fun, and I don't think I've ever even tried to do this prompt before. So yeah, What Matters in Jane Austen is a work of literary criticism that looks thematically at different elements across Jane Austen's novels, and as the subtitle, 20 Essential Questions Answered suggests, each chapter answers one of these questions, such as how much does age matter, how do Jane Austen's characters look, why is the weather important, how much money is enough, and why do her plots rely on blunders, to name a few. And so far I've been enjoying it. At the end of chapter 1, How Much Does Age Matter, Mullan argues that the difference in age between Emma and Mr. Knightley matters primarily because it seems large enough to both of them to rule out a romantic relationship. The 16 years between them allowed them not to notice what they felt towards each other. They have behaved as if the gap between their ages precluded romance, but we know that they should have known better. Age does shape their relationship, but not at all as they expected. So we don't know who or if Emma ends up with anyone, but at what cost to a modern reader? Like, I like Mr. Knightley, but still, ew. They soften the gap in adaptations, making Mr. Knightley younger or act younger, probably for this reason. Then on the 15th of July, I read Jane Austen's Winchester poem titled The Winchester Verses, or When Winchester Races? I'm not exactly sure. Jane Austen wrote the poem on the 15th of July 1817, which was the day of the Winchester races and also St. Swithin's Day. St. Swithin was a 9th century bishop of Winchester, and it is said that if it rained on his feast day, it would rain for 40 days afterwards. I can't remember, but I don't think it rained on the 15th, so yay, we're in the clear. Jane Austen's brother Henry Austen wrote of the days preceding her death that she wrote while she could with a pen and with a pencil when a pen was become too laborious. The day preceding her death she composed some stanzas replete with fancy and vigour. However, he was mistaken as to what day she wrote it. It was written on the 15th and Jane Austen died 3 days later on the 18th. There are 2 lines that Jane Austen may not have written intentionally about herself, but they've come to represent her and her eternal presence. When once we are buried, you think we are dead, but behold me immortal. This week I also watched a YouTube video titled Ostentatiousness, which I thought I would mention as it has given me a lot to think about. It is a vid hosted by Sean Breeds Books, where Roz from Skelly Dandling about books, Tilly from Tilly's Shelf and Kathy talk about all things Jane Austen, and I think they help to clarify why I find it hard to rank Jane Austen. I mean, I find it hard to rank books by other authors, so if I do, I have to place them in tiers, but when it comes to Jane Austen, I've come to the conclusion that she is in a unique position where they're in a circle, because as soon as I pick up one as my favourite, I always remember the next, and so that one is my favourite until I get back to that first one. And that leads me to propose of the Jane Austen atom, based on the Bohr model, where the energy in, which is the act of reading, excites the particular electron or book to a higher energy level, shell, and whilst in the excited state it is the favourite, but then after a while it goes back with the rest and they're all even again. I know the Bohr model isn't the accepted model of the atom and that the electrons exist in negatively charged clouds without fixed orbits, but I use this model for illustrative purposes only.
Made her too tall, Emma? No. And certainly not too tall. Not in the least too tall.
I lay it down as a general rule, Harriet, that if a woman doubts whether she should accept a man or not, she certainly ought to refuse him. Do you think I had better say no? Not for the world would I advise you either way. You must be the best judge of your own happiness.
Oh, by all means. Fall asleep! You must dance another set!
I am ready whenever I am wanted.
With whom will you dance?
Or with you. If you will ask me. You have shown that you can dance, and we are not really so much brother and sisters to make it improper.
No, indeed.
If I loved you less, then I might be able to talk about it more.
Put up a spoiler warning and keep it there as people.
This week I continued reading What Matters in Jane Austen. It has been interesting to read as John Mullan provides us context about things that would have been obvious to contemporary readers but not so much to us. Like in chapter 13, How Much Money is Enough, which provides us with a guide as to how much money was needed to live, what a suitable competence was, how much it cost to keep a carriage and servants, and how it was common for people to know how much money other people had, which can be helpful things to know. Like, I don't know how much a carriage would cost to own and operate, but I know that it confers a lot of status. Which, going back to Emma, there is a comment about Mr. Perry, the apothecary, who may be getting a carriage. As they were turning into the grounds, Mr. Perry passed by on horseback. The gentleman spoke of his horse. "By the by," said Frank Churchill to Mrs. Weston presently, "what became of Mr. Perry's plan of setting up his carriage?" Mrs. Weston looked surprised and said, "I did not know that he ever had any such plan." Nay, I had it from you. You wrote me word of it 3 months ago. Me? Impossible. Indeed you did. I remember it perfectly. You mentioned it as what was certainly to be very soon. Mrs. Perry had told somebody and was extremely happy about it. It was owing to her persuasion, as she thought his being out in bad weather did him a great deal of harm. You must remember it now. Upon my word, I never heard of it till this moment. Never? Really never? Bless me, how could it be? Then I must have dreamt it. This is one of the many blunders in Emma that comes close to revealing a secret of a relationship, which as the conversation goes on, you may be able to determine who Frank Churchill has heard this from. Actually, this plot point was mentioned in a few chapters in What Matters in Jane Austen, so I guess it really matters. The plot of Emma turns on Mr. Perry's increasing affluence, Frank Churchill blurting out his knowledge of Mr. Perry's plan of setting up his carriage. I also started reading a simple story by Elizabeth Inchbald, which was published in 1791. This was for prompt number 5, read a book by a contemporary of Jane Austen, published between 1775 and 1817. I was going to read The Romance of the Forest by Anne Radcliffe, which was also published in 1791, as was mentioned in Emma. However, I changed my mind when I saw a simple story be recommended by Kathleen in the Austenaciousness video, and I think that it would probably be better to read The Romance of the Forest with Northanger Abbey, which satirises Gothic novels. So anyway, it's interesting to read a book by a contemporary, as we are able to see Austen in a literary context. From the couple of books I've read from this time, they don't really match up to my enjoyment of Austen, but we'll see with this one. I think I'll talk about it more when I finish reading it. But I just want to include something that the main character, a young lady, said. I love him with all the passion of a mistress and with all the tenderness of a wife, which is certainly not something you'd get in Jane Austen. Probably not even something a young lady would even say in the 18th century. Sometimes I can't follow the tone. Like, I think that this is supposed to be serious, but I laughed when I first read that sentence and kind of laughed when I read it again now. Anyway, so far it's been alright. This week I also watched Emma 2020, which was the film that started my enjoyment of Jane Austen. I mean, it made me read my first Jane Austen and then watch my first Jane Austen film. Oh my god, imagine if instead of Emma I read Persuasion just before the 2022 film came out as my first Jane Austen. Ugh. Yeah, I don't know. I don't dislike the movie, the Persuasion 2022, so much now because I've kind of divorced it from the book, and I don't know who that is, but that is definitely not Anne Elliot. Let's stop talking about that film and talk about one that I love. It has become one of my all-time favourite movies. I love the costumes, the gloves, the bonnets, the hair, the sets, and how you can tell it was made by someone who respects the source material. And I even like some of the slight changes that were made, such as Emma actually talking to Robert Martin and fixing things herself, and also her continued friendship with Harriet. I also like how they made Mr. Knightley younger, and he seems to be less patronising towards Emma. My only issue with the film is that there isn't enough Jane Fairfax and Frank Churchill. A vid of the deleted scenes popped up in my recommended, and even the inclusion of some of these scenes could fix the issue, such as gossip at the haberdashery, which is one of my favourite scenes in the book, but also a post for Dear Jane, you owe me no apologies, and let us pay a call on Jane Fairfax. And after watching Emma, I finally watched the live stream about the film by the host of Jane Austen July. So anyway, we can now cross off prompt number 6, watch a direct screen adaptation of a Jane Austen book.
Looking out a dirty old window, oh, and I wonder why. Friday night and everyone's moving.
But seriously, I actually have a way normal life for a teenage girl.
Everything I think and everything I do is wrong. I was wrong about Elton. I was wrong about Christian. Now Josh hated me. It all boiled down to one inevitable conclusion. I was just totally clueless.
Okay, so this week well, it was hardly a week, it was the last 3 days of July, we completed the final 3 prompts. First of all, we finished A Simple Story by Elizabeth Inchbald. Don't know if I said this or not, but Elizabeth Inchbald was the writer, translator of Lover's Vows, the play in Mansfield Park. Anyway, The Simple Story intertwines the tales of the flirtatious Miss Milner who falls in love with her guardian, a Roman Catholic priest, an aristocrat, and of their daughter Matilda who, banished from her father's sight, craves his love. And it's kind of like Wuthering Heights in the sense that it starts out with one crazy generation and then the mellowed second gen, but that's probably the only similarity with Wuthering Heights. A lot of the book is concerned with the proper education of women and shows the differences between the academic education of men and the focus on sensibility and appearance in the education of women. But then also the difference in the education of Miss Milner as compared to the education of her daughter Matilda, as Matilda was not only given an intellectual education but one that was also focused on emotional sensibility, whilst Miss Milner received a fashionable education for women. And I guess it can be inferred that the difference in their educations was what leads to their different outcomes. Miss Milner's unhappy ending and Matilda's happy one. But their endings could also be affected by their surroundings, as Miss Milner was allowed to participate in fashionable society whilst Matilda is basically imprisoned and secluded from society. He has beheld the pernicious effects of an improper education in the destiny which attended the unthinking Miss Milner. On the opposite side, what may not be hoped from that school of prudence, though of adversity, in which Matilda was bred. And Mr. Milner, Matilda's grandfather, had better have given his fortune to a distant branch of his family, as Matilda's father once meant to do, so that he had given his daughter a proper education. Anyway, those were some of the things that I thought about A Simple Story. I think I liked it more than the book I read last year, but not as much as Jane Austen, which is kind of expected. So now we can cross off prompt number 5, read a book by a contemporary of Jane Austen, published between 1775 and 1817. And then I finished reading What Matters in Jane Austen by John Mullan, which I found to be really great. I think John Mullan has a fun writing style that is engaging, so it never feels like you're reading a textbook. He points out that it's important to look at the small things as it can give rise to a deeper understanding of Jane Austen's work. We can look at how intra-connected her novels are, how intricately, tightly woven they are, where no detail is redundant. And John Mullan goes on to say that this is the reason why when you reread her novels you have the experience of suddenly noticing some crucial detail that you have never noticed before and realizing how demanding she is of your attention. And then also, and when you do notice things, it is as if Austen is setting puzzles or inviting you to notice little tricks which do justice to the small important complications of life. And by going through each of the 20 questions, John Mullan starts to unravel these tricks and provides analysis on why Jane Austen would choose to do the things she does. John Mullan also explores the interconnectedness of her novels by providing examples from each of her books relevant to the question, and this allows us to observe patterns which can also be important in understanding the finer details of Jane Austen. And after finishing the book, it led me to think about the subtitle, 20 Essential Questions Answered. Are they essential, and who are they essential to? I think it all depends on where you're at with Jane Austen. If you haven't read her books, then they're probably not essential to you, but 1, if you like Jane Austen, and 2, if you're new to or like reading analyses of Jane Austen's work, then they might be essential for you. Anyway, I found it very interesting and enriching and thoroughly enjoyed reading it, and I guess that was John Mullan's aim, as at the end of the introduction he wrote, "The self-indulgent purpose of the book has been to convey my own pleasure in reading Jane Austen. Its less selfish aim is simply to sharpen the pleasure of other readers of her novels." So we can cross off prompt number 3, read a non-fiction work about Jane Austen of her time. Reading a book by one of Jane Austen's contemporaries and then also reading a book about her work gives us an idea of where she's placed in literary terms and just how unique she was. When compared to her contemporaries, the differences are clearly evident, especially in terms of plot, as she was more concerned with realism than with plot. As John Mullan writes in the introduction of What Matters in Jane Austen, provide some bare plot summaries of her novels, and they can be made to sound rather less daring than those of contemporaries such as Maria Edgeworth or Mary Brunton. Her brilliance is in the style, not the content. Like in A Simple Story, where we have a lot of plot, we have a girl living in seclusion, there's kidnapping and jewels, and then we have Emma, which follows a young woman as she plays matchmaker with her friends. In Sir Walter Scott's review of Emma in the Quarterly Review, he says, "We therefore bestow no mean compliment upon the author of Emma when we say that, keeping close to common incidents and to such characters as occupy the ordinary walks of life, she has produced sketches of such spirit and originality that we never miss the excitation which depends upon a narrative of uncommon events." So it's really Austen's realism that sets her apart and makes such a striking contrast to the preceding style of novel. As most things in her novels are plausible and could happen in reality, but there's also a difference with how she tells her stories and her use of a simplistic prose style. As John Mullan goes on to say in the introduction of What Matters in Jane Austen, she did things with fiction that had never been done before. She did things with characterization, with dialogue, with English sentences that had never been done before. Is it possible that she had no particular idea of how singular her novels were? And to end Jane Austen July, I watched Clueless. For the final prompt, watch a modern screen adaptation or retelling of a Jane Austen book. And when I googled it, they were celebrating its 30th birthday, so. Clueless is a fun modern day, well, modern compared to Jane Austen times, adaptation of Emma. It's a good film, I've watched it so many times. And with that, we can cross off the 7th and final prompt, watch a modern screen adaptation, retelling of a Jane Austen book. This has been a great July. Thanks again to Katie from Books and Things, Marissa from Blatantly Bookish, and Claudia from Spencer's Library for organising yet another fantastic Jane Austen July, and I can't wait for next year. Thanks for watching. See you later. Goodbye.